to How We Work Now, where we explore how people are reshaping the modern workplace through lived experience with neurodiversity, chronic illness, and disability. Today, I'm joined by Melody Mejeh. She is the founder and CEO of KindPath Health, a prevention-first behavioral health platform built to surface early signs of distress and connect people to support before a crisis hits. She blends lived experience as an autistic, ADHD, and bipolar leader with a strategic product vision, designing with trauma awareness, equity, and compassion at her core, and building systems to serve the people that are often left behind. I'm so glad to have you here with us today, Melody. Do you want to introduce yourself to our viewers in your own words?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Mel, and I'm the founder and CEO of KindPath Health. We're building KAI, which is an agentic clinical platform that tries to prevent mental health crises before they happen by checking on you daily, spotting patterns in your mental health data, and providing evidence-based therapeutic support while connecting you to your care team when things start going sideways. A little bit about me. I'm autistic, I have ADHD, and I live with bipolar disorder. I'm not saying that, as some I've overcome my disabilities thing, but I'm saying it because those diagnoses are fundamental to why I can do this work. Before KindPath, I spent 12 years in product management in fintech and healthcare. And most recently, I was at US Bank managing platforms that supported a $378 billion loan portfolio. So I got to build tools to protect institutions from risk while watching people I loved not get the help they needed for their mental health. And eventually, I pivoted, building what I wish had existed when I was in crisis.
Such a beautiful story, and I think something close to heart to so many people living with, different conditions or disabilities. Um, you speak publicly about being neurodivergent and having bipolar disorder. Are there other ways that those personal experiences have shaped your journey, both as a leader and a founder?
Yes, most definitely. I mean, I wouldn't be building this if the existing systems hadn't failed me so catastrophically.
Mhm.
I've been in crisis, like I don't know if I'm going to make it through this kind of crisis multiple times in my life. And every time the tools that I was told to use either weren't available when I needed them, required me
Mhm.
to be functional enough to access them, which is a joke when you're barely functional, or
Mhm.
designed for a version of mental illness that doesn't match how it actually shows up. So I mean, if you're autistic like me or bipolar, crisis doesn't always look like what people expect it to look like. Sometimes it's not dramatic, it's just going flat or non-communicative. Sometimes it's hypomania. And everybody mistakes that for productivity until you're
Mhm.
only getting 2 hours of sleep a night and your judgment is completely compromised. So the mental health system kept trying to fit me into these really clean diagnostic boxes, but my brain doesn't work in boxes. And as a founder, that experience made me focused on building tools that work in the actual moments when things are falling apart, not just when you're stable enough to remember to use them. So I built KAI because it checks in on you every day. And I know that when I needed help the most, I could not have initiated reaching out. The tool has to come to you. So as a
Mhm.
I refuse to pretend that mental illness is something that I manage privately. It's really shaped how I think, how I problem solve, how I see patterns that others miss. I mean, the same brain that can spiral into a crisis is the brain that could hold an enormous amount of complexity and see system failures that others overlook. And I'm not successful despite being bipolar and autistic. Those are fundamental to, I think, why I can do this work.
Great, because they give you the insight into what is actually needed instead of somebody who has no experience trying to determine for themselves what other people need when they've never experienced something like that.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I think
Hmm.
a unique perspective being on both sides of the healthcare system as a person in crisis and also as a person that's building tools for vulnerable populations. So I think I have a dual-sided perspective.
I think that's so important. Um, so when you're building a kind path and looking at the internal workflows, what has been really important to you in making sure that even the internal workflows are humane and accessible to the people working in them?
Yeah, I think for KindPath, it's really important to talk to the people that you're serving and realize that human capacity fluctuates. And I think it's important that we include that in as part of its fundamental design. I think you wanted to know about KindPath's internal workflows, right? And what was important to
Mm.
me when I was building them. So
Yes.
for me, like I can't operate at 100% every day. Some days I'm at 60, and then some days I'm at 30, and I'm just trying to keep things from falling apart. And if
Hmm.
I'm experiencing that as the CEO with resources, with control, what about everybody else? So for me, flexibility, building KindPath in a flexible nature is non-negotiable. So even the way I run the company, it's impacted the way that we run our business. Like I don't do status meetings that could be a Slack message. I don't require people to be on, all the time. I
Mm.
work asynchronously. You can carve out which times the work best for your brain. If you work better at 10 p.m. than 10 a.m., it doesn't matter. I mean, the idea that everybody's peak hours are 9 to 5 to me is a very,
Mm.
very perspective. I'm also really good about protecting people from context switching because if you're ADHD or autistic, it will destroy you. So we try to batch similar types of work. We're intentional about the way we communicate, especially for non-urgent things. And we define urgent as somebody who's in danger,
Mm.
not we don't require an immediate response unless it's actually urgent.
Right.
Right. And for us, everything gets written down. Every decision, every conversation, every change in direction, and it's necessary for neurodivergent team members who might struggle remembering verbal conversations or might struggle to read between the lines of what's not said, right? So
Mm.
when things are documented, we're not dependent on anybody's memory or interpretation. So being neurodivergent has really shaped the way that we run our internal processes at KAI and KindPath, and then also the care and meticulous detail that goes into architecting a product like this. I think
Hmm.
that's been a huge differentiator for me in my career, especially building a tool that can really help a large group of people prevent crisis.
Right. And I love hearing all those different accommodations you described. I use a lot of those in my own personal work as well, kind of to make sure that, the work you're doing is accessible for the people doing the work as well, and all the different ways that people think and function. So, with mental health deeply stigmatized in many communities, what strategies have you found effective to really build trust and encourage people to use a tool like KindPath?
Hmm. I would say lead with outcomes, not diagnosis. Like we
Mm.
we don't talk about mental illness in our marketing. We talk about feeling overwhelmed or having a hard time, managing stress or getting through a period that's difficult. So language
Mhm.
doesn't require someone to identify as mentally ill to see themselves in it. Because stigma means that people won't seek help until they're in crisis. They won't use a tool label for people with depression because that requires admitting that they have depression. But they will use a tool that helps them feel better or
Mhm.
manifest or get support when things are hard. Once they're using it and it's actually helping, the labels matter less. So we're building trust through transparency about how KAI works. We tell you exactly the data that we collect, how we use it, why we're asking certain questions, and what happens with your data once you give it to us, right? There's no black box. People need to understand that this tool is for them and it's not surveillance for somebody else's benefit. Oh,
Right.
yeah. And I think also the way that we position K is also important here because we position K as a supplement to care, not a replacement.
Mm.
I think what we're trying to do is fundamentally different. We are not trying to replace the 167 hours that you are 168 hours basically that you have in a week, and only 1 hour of that you're with your therapist. Where we're trying to say that we're trying to reduce the fear that using technology means you're giving up on human connection or that you're
Mm.
sick enough for real help, right? We also use peer voices in our messaging. So not testimonials from people who are recovered, but people who are actively managing mental health and using tools like KAI as a part of that.
So I'm hearing a lot of what you do is trying to kind of externalize the problem. So someone doesn't have to say, I identify with this thing personally, but they can say, well, I do struggle with things that are very similar to that. And so that way they don't have maybe the internal pushback of not wanting to feel like they have a mental illness, but they can still get help.
Yeah. So when other people see others like them using the application, it kind of normalizes that experience.
Hmm.
But stigma is something that we can't completely eliminate. There's some people who are not going to use any mental health tool, no matter how you position it. But
Hmm.
the hope is that we can reach the people who are struggling and are willing to try something. And as they improve, maybe they become the advocates who help us reduce stigma for other users.
I love that. I think, stigma is such a tricky thing in society because we'd love if it didn't exist, but it does exist. And so trying to navigate around helping people as much as possible, even though there is a stigma that can help,
Yeah,
put up barriers for people.
exactly.
Okay, so what misconceptions do people still have about neurodivergent or bipolar leaders that you feel limited or really irritated by?
Ooh, this question is an important one. I think the most damaging misconception is that we're unstable or unpredictable.
Mm.
People hear bipolar and they imagine dramatic things like really huge moods, like mood swings,
Hmm.
impulsive decisions, erratic behavior, or they assume I'm going to have an episode and just like tank my company or something like that. Right?
Hmm.
Reality is that I probably have better systems for managing risk and decision making than most neurotypical founders because I've had to build them. And I know
Mm.
patterns pretty intimately. I track my sleep, my mood, my energy. I have checks and balances. I don't make major strategic decisions when I'm in extreme stress. And I can recognize those states because I've spent decades learning how to identify them, right? With a therapist, with the appropriate levels of support. So, what looks like instability to people on the outside is actually a high degree of self-awareness. I know when I'm hypomanic.
Mm.
I know when my judgment might be compromised, so I slow my decisions down during those periods. I know when I'm not feeling at my best, and I also trust my strategic thinking. And that's not unstable. To me, that's disciplined.
Hmm.
Also, an assumption that neurodivergent people can't handle ambiguity or need everything to be spelled out. But ambiguity is only hard when it's unnecessary, when people are unclear because they have
Hmm.
things through or they're protecting themselves in some way. Strategic uncertainty, which is what a lot of startups like mine deal with, I'm incredibly comfortable with. I just need clarity about what we do and what we don't know. And I need people to be honest about that fact. And I think
Hmm.
pet peeve for me is the assumption that mental illness means that I'm dealing with symptoms that interfere with my work. Most days I'm fine. Most days my bipolar disorder is well managed with medication and therapy. But because I'm open about my diagnosis, people assume that I'm always struggling and
Hmm.
overly cautious about giving me challenging feedback. That's not really what I need. I don't want to be treated delicately. I want to be treated like a competent CEO who happens to manage a chronic condition. Just like you
Right.
you wouldn't assume somebody who had like diabetes, for example, is always in crisis. You assume that they manage it and they get on with their life. And mental
Hmm.
this is kind of treated differently. And I don't know why that is. They they also assume that I only care about accessibility and mental health. They can't see me as a technical founder who understands like regulatory compliance or risk modeling and product strategy. They expect
Hmm.
me passionate and mission driven, but not necessarily strategically rigorous. So that's something that gets under my skin a little bit.
Kind of being put in the stereotypical box of the perceptions people have of bipolar disorder as an idea instead of the actual person that you are.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, I think with a lot of disabilities, people look at that as just in the limitations, and they don't see that, when you live with a disability or a condition, you have to be creative, so you learn ways to manage things, and you have experience with the different things that, whatever disability you have causes, so that you know how to handle stuff like that when it comes up. Whereas someone who doesn't have any experience might seem on the surface like, oh, well, they don't have a disability, so they'd be better at the job. When something comes up, they wouldn't have that kind of experience to know how to deal with different things that someone who struggles with a disability or manages a disability does have the experience.
Yes, yes, I think that's exceptionally true. I also think that those who are neurodivergent has actually learned to manage their own risk pretty closely. We
Mm,
have to be aware of what it looks like when we're starting to spiral because the risk of not knowing is too great. So I spent a lot of years building up that self-awareness where I can tell what cycle I'm in and adjust
mhm.
actions accordingly. So that's been extremely helpful for me.
Right, yeah. So, what is something else you've tried at KindPath that kind of pushes back against traditional startup culture?
We don't celebrate the grind. We don't
Mm,
overwork, period. Like I'm not excited when someone says they did an all-nighter. I give you the next day off
yeah.
because that doesn't wow me.
Mhm,
It doesn't make anything better. Like I think that grind work, that overwork is just a sign of poor planning, in my opinion. So if your
mm,
model needs people to like regularly sacrifice their health, you've built a broken business. And I refuse to be
mhm.
a company that only functions if people destroy themselves. And
I,
and I don't do performative hustle culture on LinkedIn. I'm
mhm.
not posting at 5 a.m. I'm not bragging about how little I slept. I setting boundaries, taking breaks, protecting my mental health, and building systems that don't require constant crisis mode to function. I
Mhm,
do post about our progress but I also have to be honest about what's difficult. Um,
mhm,
Traditional startup culture says you need to project success at all times if you're going to attract investors, if you're going to acquire,
mhm,
and I think that's crap. I think people trust authenticity more than they trust that polished performance. And if
mhm,
urgent, masking is exhausting. All right. So
mhm.
very open about diagnosis, even in professional contexts, which is really unheard of in startup leadership. Most founders are supposed to hide anything that could be perceived as weakness. But for me, I I don't take that perspective. I talk about being autistic and bipolar in investor meetings, and
Mhm,
I use it as context to say why I'm the right person to build this company. So investors who can't see lived experience as a competitive advantage aren't really the right partners for KindPath. And that
mm.
probably cost me funding, but I'd rather have aligned investors than ones who see my disability as a liability.
Right, because like even a lot of times if you don't outwardly say, "Oh, I have autism," or these conditions, people sometimes still pick up that something's off and they still discriminate against you anyways. So you might as well be open and look for the people that, you know, are understanding and have compassion and a willingness to work with different people instead of being very closed-minded.
Yeah, and I thought of some other things that we do that startups do pretty routinely that we absolutely don't do.
Hmm.
We don't do all hands meetings where everybody has to pretend they're enthusiastic. We don't do that. We don't do team building activities. I know that sounds weird, but that requires a lot of emotional labor and socializing outside work hours. And sometimes we don't have the time, right? And we don't want to feel forced
Hmm.
to participate in things like that. Plus, I have a remotely distributed team, which makes team building
Mm.
limited. Um, and I think probably the biggest thing is that I built KindPath as a mom while managing my own mental health. And I've been pretty honest about that constraint. And
Hmm.
most startup culture says that founders need to be 100% focused on the company and anything else is a distraction. And I
Mm.
if that's not true. You can build something meaningful while having a full life that includes responsibilities and limitations. You just have to be
Hmm.
smart and strategic about where you spend your time. And that's what I've had to do while building this company.
It's ironic to me. Like autistic people, we're known for having black and white thinking, but there's a lot of black and white thinking in neurotypical corporate culture. Like you have to be you're a mom or you're a CEO.
Yeah.
But when you're both, it's not accepted the same way, even though there's so many amazing CEOs who are also amazing mothers, and you absolutely can be both
Yes,
things.
yes, you can.
So, if you could snap your fingers and remove one barrier that keeps neurodivergent or bipolar founders from succeeding, getting started up, what would that be?
Probably access to capital
Mm,
without having to perform neurotypically. I mean, the entire fundraising process is designed to filter out people whose brains work differently. Think about what venture capital requires. It requires networking events where you make small talk with strangers. Okay, violation number one. Two, warm introductions that depend on social capital that you may not have access to. Violation number two. Pitching meetings where you need to read the room. Okay, if you're autistic, you can't do that. And adjusting your communication style in real time. Also not possible.
Mhm,
Back-to-back meetings with no recovery time, and you just have to be on all the time for hours. I mean, all of those things are incredibly difficult for somebody who's neurodivergent.
mhm,
If you have ADHD and you struggle with socializing, if you're bipolar and your energy goes up and down, or you're introverted, or you just communicate differently, I mean, you're going to struggle with that. And it's not
mhm,
because your idea is worse or the way you execute your idea is weak, just because you can't play the social game that venture capitalism kind of requires.
mhm,
And that is something that I would definitely love to change because all that game playing has nothing to do with building a successful company. You know, being charismatic doesn't make you more able to manage business operations or build great.
mhm.
But VCs fund people they're comfortable with, and they're comfortable with people who communicate like them. So if I could snap my fingers,
Yeah.
I'd redo the entire investment system and evaluate ideas and execution on actual merit instead
Mm,
of social capital. Um, be judged on the quality of the way we think instead of the way we can perform. I
mhm.
probably get rid of that rapid fire Q&A where you have to think on your feet. I've done like 2-minute pitches. Like my brain is just like, I can't do this. I can explain this company and our strategy for hours though, on end. But ask me to condense
Mhm,
that information into a 2-minute pitch, you've got me. I can't. Right. So just thinking about areas that can be more neuro aware
mhm,
in the fundraising process would be great. I'd also lead probably create funds that are led by people with lived experience of disability.
mm,
I think that would probably be something that'd be revolutionary because then you'd understand that different communication styles don't mean less capable. And I think that's something that's missing from the current VC model today.
So you mean like having more funding communities that are led by neurodivergent people themselves?
Yes. Yes, investors who can see that like a founder that needs accommodations isn't high maintenance. So someone who understands,
Hmm.
advocates for them, which is what you want in a CEO anyway. So I would love to I would love to see funds that are led by people who are actually disabled.
Hmm.
Be a game changer.
So, living in the system as it is today, do you have any strategies or things that have helped you cope with dealing with the whole circus of getting funding when you're, starting?
Um, I think, I've leaned on my network pretty hard. And
Mm,
I also connect with disabled people who are founders, and I make them a part of my support system. They're also able to provide me with information on funding opportunities, on grants, on things that are really beneficial for raising capital for my
mm,
company. They've also been a listening ear too, because they go through the same struggles that I go through, both as a founder and as an individual with a disability. So it's comforting to have those people in my corner, as I'm building this and as I'm going through struggles and as I'm celebrating wins.
mm.
I connect with those people because they keep me grounded and they keep me connected to what really matters. Um, did I miss anything? Uh, let me think. Uh, can you repeat the question just to make sure I answered everything? So
Yeah, no, so you were talking about the kind of the barriers on funding and venture capital for founders, and I was asking if you have any strategies that you've used to personally help you navigate those barriers.
yeah, I think it's a lot of it comes down to research. Like I rigorously look up funders and I look at what they fund
Mm,
in the past, what their values are, what their ethos is, what their thesis is, and kind of see is there alignment between what I'm building and what they're looking to fund. And I think that's really where it comes down to is alignment.
mm,
Um, you'll know the difference between someone who's going to just write you a check and someone who wants to be a development partner.
mm,
So I think it really comes down to scrutinizing whom you call a partner and what is the give and take in that relationship. I think that has been what's kept me going because I think if I were to hit the wall numerous times, I think it would really, and I have, but
mm,
it would I would struggle far worse with it if I didn't have partners and professionals that see my vision, that understand the enormity of the work that I'm involved in, and also can see the importance that lived experience has in that architecture. So I think
mm,
having those people in my corner has made the work easier. It's helped me see clear pathways to revenue. It's helped me vet my business model early on when I was first starting this idea. It helped me refine my pricing model. I mean, you find a ton of folks who are willing to give time and energy to founders
mm.
doing purposeful work. And I say take advantage of those and ask. You get 100%. You get what's the saying? You get 0% of what you don't ask for. So you
Yeah.
honestly ask if you find someone who is purpose driven and mission aligned with you, ask if there's anybody in their orbit that they can connect you to, and start building
Hmm.
a web of folks that can support you and vice versa because
Hmm.
that's what keeps you going as a founder. I absolutely
Hmm.
don't think I can be where I am without the folks that I've connected to over the years.
So I'm hearing, finding community and leaning into that community and then doing as much kind of asynchronous research as you can beforehand on the people you're connecting with to kind of take a little bit of the load off of the social circus, thinking on your feet, talking to everybody. You can find
Yeah,
some people in advance that you know you're more aligned with and focus your attention there.
yes, yes. I've made a ton of lists. I have lists everywhere, and my
Love
lists
lists.
I love I love that and a good journal. And so
Mm,
I've made lists of basically on a spectrum of alignment where certain firms sit and who in those firms have invested in purpose-driven or social enterprises that align with KindPath's mission. And that's been my target list in raising.
mm,
So those are the folks that I go to, as well as angel investment communities, folks that are in the industry that I work with. So connecting with actual providers and people who are in commercial insurance, all the target personas that are valuable or that we serve. It's important to have them as champions as well. So connect with people, learn what they do, learn what you can to impact what you're building, and also keep your ear to the ground in the industries that you serve. I find
mm,
that finding champions in those industries really help you connect to the people that you need when you're building. So I've built a clinical sort of advisory board with folks that are in the industry of providing mental health services to different populations across the country. And then I built a team of people who are actual clinician leaders or healthcare executives that can
mm,
help me think through what it takes to operate a business like this at scale. So finding those voices are really important. And I would encourage everyone who's building a business to define what that group might be for them.
mm. So, we'll do one last question for the interview today. If you could give one message to other autistic, ADHD, or bipolar founders who feel discouraged about starting their startup or their own business, what would you want them to hear?
Hmm. Probably that your lived experience is not a liability. It's actually your competitive advantage. We
Mm,
gaps that others missed because we've lived them. We understand the pain points that other people have to research because we felt them. I
mm,
think many of us unfortunately know what broken is because the system has failed them.
mm,
That's worth more than any MBA or years of industry experience. So build for yourself first. If you create something that genuinely helps you, there will be thousands or even millions of others who need it too. So don't try to build for some imagined user. They have plenty of tools already. Build for the version of you that was struggling, that had nowhere to turn. Build for the people who are
mm,
living in the gap. And try your best to stop performing. I think it's going to burn you out. It's not going to make you better as a founder. Investors that can't see your lived experience as expertise aren't the right partners. The
mm,
team members who need you to mask constantly aren't the right hires. Customers who don't value what you're building aren't your market. I think you got to find people who get it and build with them. And it's
mm,
okay if your capacity fluctuates through the day, through the week. It's fine. Build your business around that reality instead of pretending that you can keep up with an 80-hour work week.
mm.
Because sustainability is gonna beat burnout every time.
Yeah.
I've learned from founders who have exited who are who are still here in 10 years, and they're not the ones that ran the fastest. They're the ones who built systems that could be maintained. Uh,
Hmm.
I will also tell them that investors are going to doubt you because of your diagnosis. That's just it. People are going to question whether you can lead because of your disability. And some doors will close because you're honest about who you are. Just let them close. They're
Hmm.
doors. There are other paths, there are other investors, there are other opportunities with people who are going to see your value. So you got to just find your people and
Mm,
don't do the work alone. Find other neurodivergent founders, find disabled entrepreneurs, find people who understand what it's like to build while managing their mental health. Trust me, they're going to remind you that you're
mm,
not nuts. You're not nuts for trying to change a system that was never built for you. And you're going to need that
mm,
pretty deeply because you're going to have bad days and you're going to have good days. And I think when the bad days happen, rest, like take a nap, recover, and come back when you can. It's probably the best lesson I've learned in the
mm.
years of building this company.
Yeah. You can't be everything for everybody. You got to be yourself and find the people that, like who you are because you can't live your whole life pretending to be someone else and have any kind of health and happiness.
You can't. And the other thing is belonging. Like you
Hmm.
have to know that you belong here, that your ideas are important and your perspective is valuable. So don't let anybody convince you otherwise. I think the reason why we build companies is because of the insight that our lived experience gives us. So I would say keep building, keep being honest about who you are because the right people will find you and you're going to build something.
Right. And consistency is key, but consistency doesn't necessarily mean what you might think it means. It doesn't mean, working 80 hours a week, never taking breaks. It means doing what you can do in a consistent way so that you don't fall off a cliff at some point and just crash.
Yep, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on our show today, Mel, and sharing your story. It was a joy to have you. Is there anything else you want to share with everyone before we wrap up?
I think for people who want to follow what we're building at KindPath, you can find me on LinkedIn or look for updates on kindpath.health as we launch our product in March. So, if we're doing something different, we're building clinical AI and for people who actually need these tools, and I'd love to have you along for the ride as we get close to launch. So, just I want to say that, being autistic and bipolar doesn't make me inspirational. It makes me somebody who's navigating the world with a different brain. And I'm
Mm,
just honest to share what it looks like. And if that honesty helps you feel less alone or gives you permission to be honest about your struggles, then I think this conversation was absolutely worth having. So thank you for having me on, Anita. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. I hope you gained some amazing insights on today's episode. Thank you for watching.